Good morning to everyone. Welcome back. We welcome you back to Vista Presents LED and Terminology featuring Brandy Ruiz. I'm J.R. Dominguez, and I'm joined this morning by Brandy Ruiz, Jason Rodriguez, and Francesca Dominguez. Please note that all microphones have been silenced, but the chat feature is available for communication. Francesca will be monitoring the comments and questions on chat. This morning, we're featuring a repeat performance of Brandy's second lighting educational session. Brandy Ruiz has been with Mar Vista Sales for over 16 years. She has risen through the ranks from receptionist to quotations to project management. And Brandy has always prided herself in continued education and betterment. This past year, she challenged herself to the National Council on Qualifications for the Lighting Professional, the NCQLP, and passed the final. Since Brandy has acquired her LC certification, I thought it would be appropriate to have her share that knowledge with all of you. But before we begin, please be sure you're in receipt of Friday's email notice from Francesca Dominguez. In it, there is a crossword puzzle. Keep those puzzles nearby, as all of the clues will be disclosed during the meeting, so fill it in as we go. If you have not received it, pick it from our chat feature up above. The first three submissions who send their correctly completed exams to quotes@marvistasales.com will receive a $20 Amazon gift card. Good morning, Brandy.
Good morning, and thank you everyone for joining us. These sessions are intended for people who are new to lighting, to give you some understanding of terms or concepts you may experience when you're working with lighting and your lighting agents. This is our second session with the intention of discussing LEDs and some lighting terms that relate to them specifically, or at least more frequently. Previously, we had sent out a glossary of lighting terms, though at that point we only covered a few of them. Today, we're going to delve in a little deeper. Before we get into our LED discussion, we need to go back and discuss light itself for a moment. The light we see, visible light, is a form of electromagnetic energy, which means it's the same radiation as radio, microwaves, and X-rays. All these forms of energy have specific wavelengths. Our eyes recognize a narrow band of those wavelengths and interpret them as visible light. There's also forms of light that appear just outside the visible range, called infrared and ultraviolet. We can't see these forms of light, but they exist, and they affect the people, animal, plants, and other objects that are exposed to them. Light wavelengths are generally measured in nanometers, so the entire visible light spectrum fits in around 380 to 740 nanometers, which is a very narrow band. Infrared wavelengths are longer, and on the other side, ultraviolet wavelengths are shorter. Each nanometer measurement relates to a specific color of light, and when we take multiple wavelengths of that light and point them in the same direction, the area where they overlap will create white light. This is why items like prisms make a rainbow effect when we shine white light, especially sunlight, through them. Their shape causes those overlapping wavelengths to be broken up again, and we see them again as visible bands of colored light. An LED is a light-emitting diode, which is a small semiconductor that creates light when electricity flows through it. LEDs can range in size anywhere from a few millimeters across to several centimeters. The first visible light LED was created in 1962. It was very small, produced only red light, and it was mainly used as an indicator on instrument panels. It took just over 30 years for the first blue light LED to be created, and that's when LED lighting really started to take off, because with the blue LED, we could start doing interesting things to make white light. The most common alteration is to add a coating over the LED, often something like a phosphor, to manipulate the wavelengths of light that are generated. So when we put that LED into a light fixture, you may see it included as a single LED or a series of LEDs on a single board. Generally, the more powerful the light fixture is, if we looked inside, we'd see multiple LEDs and maybe even multiple LEDs on multiple boards. The larger the LED is, the more energy it uses and the more light, or the more lumens it generates. LEDs, like all light sources, eventually break down, though with LEDs it tends to take longer. The biggest threat to them is heat. And by using multiple LEDs on a board, we can reduce the amount of heat on a single LED, making them last longer. But this also means that if a single LED fails, the fixture will continue to work. It'll just have its light output reduced by the amount of light produced by that single LED. That's especially important when that fixture is used in an area where the light's required for safety. So combining these two concepts, the nature of LED light means that we have many ways to make the LED only produce particular wavelengths. So why does that matter? Remember earlier I said there was also light we don't see, infrared and ultraviolet. Even though we can't see those forms of light, they still have an effect. Infrared or IR light creates heat, which can be beneficial with something like a heat lamp, but it's not so great when it's shining on fresh produce. Ultraviolet, which we often hear called UV light, can kill germs, but certain wavelengths can penetrate skin, and this causes sunburns and, for some people, skin cancer. Almost all forms of artificial light contain some infrared or ultraviolet light, but the nature of LEDs and this manipulation of wavelengths means we can reduce or even eliminate IR and UV light. This means that LED light can be less damaging to objects in a space over time. We don't see as much fading or degradation. So it's really appealing to places like museums, where we have to worry about reducing damage to irreplaceable art or artifacts, but it also really affects any space where we want to reduce UV and IR damage. Now, clearly, not all light is the same or equal. So we have terms to define and clarify what specific qualities we want and need. When we talk about visible light, especially from LEDs, we often use terms like CCT, CRI, R values, TM30, binning, steps. And if you want to get really nerdy, McAdams ellipses, blackbody curves, photopic vision, scotopic vision, and the like. So CCT is one we use a lot. And if you worked with previous sources like fluorescent, you probably heard it used then too. CCT is the correlated color temperature, and it's often referred to as the Kelvin temperature. Basically, this is a way to define the way the light is perceived by our eyes. When we view white light, certain CCTs may look more yellowish, so we call those warmer. Light that appears more bluish or greenish, we would call cooler. Now, earlier, I said that white light is made up of multiple wavelengths of light. That's true regardless of the way the light is produced, and different light sources use or contain different wavelengths to make that light. With LEDs, those wavelengths can vary, even if the CCT of two LED lights is the same. Why does that matter? The wavelengths that are used affect how our eyes interpret the colors we see on items in that space. If we're missing the wavelengths that are most flattering to a color, then we don't see that color as well. So in a place like a grocery store, that might mean the meat doesn't look as fresh, or the produce looks underripe or even spoiled. In a medical facility, it can make it harder to identify certain medical conditions or monitor patient health. It can also affect the appearance of people's skin or art installations. So CCT can be important in places like retail, hotels, and museums. And that's where CRI comes in. CRI is the color rendering index, and it's a way to define how accurately the light source makes those colors appear. It's not at all scientific because it's based on human perception and judgment. The original CRI tests only used 8 colors, and they were all pastels. So the problem with that is that the more vibrant colors aren't accounted for, and they didn't always look the way they were intended. Today, we might use up to 15 colors to calculate CRI. And it's an average of how accurately those colors appear. And in general, the higher the number is, the more accurately we expect to see the color under that source. You may hear it referred to also as color fidelity. There's one thing about averages, though. They don't tell us anything about the individual numbers that make them up. For a CRI, those individual color ratings are called R values, R1, R2, R3, etc. We often pay attention to one R value in particular, R9, because that relates to a bright red, and it's often one of the hardest colors for LED light sources to render accurately. When you average those different R values to get a CRI, that means it's entirely possible for 2 different light sources or fixtures to have the same CCT and same CRI, and yet colors don't appear the same underneath them. That can be frustrating when you're designing a space. The response to that was to create a new measurement method called TM30. Great, we have another average, right? TM30 is much more detailed, and as more designers and specifiers push to use this metric, you're going to see it appear more often on fixture spec sheets. Instead of a CRI, which we said was an average of the single metric of color fidelity, TM30 measures fidelity or the sameness of a color, as well as the saturation or the intensity of the color, which they call gamut. Also, it uses 99 colors, divided into 7 related categories to more accurately reflect the colors we expect to see daily. So for all 99 colors, there's 2 values assigned, one for fidelity and one for saturation. They take those results and chart them on a graphic that looks kind of like this. By reviewing this graphic, we can get an idea how we expect the light in the space to perform. Now, there's a whole lot to cover on TM30 by itself, but for now, just understand that the further this red line deviates from the black circle, the more variation there is between the color reference and the way it's rendered under the light source that was tested. So with this graph, we can see that some colors may render better than others. And that may come into play when we're selecting a light source, because we may need to render some colors more accurately over others, or we may be willing to sacrifice certain color qualities to get a better overall performance. That's when we really start digging into the art of lighting and aesthetics and use of space, which is where you have a lighting designer typically involved. So the production of individual LEDs, just like any manufacturing process, can have variations in a production line or a run. Even though they're made up at the same time of the same materials to the same specifications, it's possible for 2 LEDs to look different when you power them on. To deal with that, there's a process called binning, where the LEDs are sorted by how much they deviate. These bins are laid out on a chart. So each time we move out one bin position from, say, one to the next, you'll see that there's a step called. It's called a step. The lighting manufacturer will have LEDs pulled from bins for their order to produce a fixture. Now they can choose to bin tightly, meaning you pull only from a specific bin and the ones, say, 1 to 2 steps away from it. Or you can bin more loosely, meaning you may pull up from bins up to 3, 4, or 5 steps from your starting point. The looser the bin selection is, the more variation you're going to see from fixture to fixture, or even sometimes within the same fixture. This can cause variation in how the 2 fixtures perform side by side. The trade-off is the more tightly you bin and order, the more expensive it is to purchase LEDs, which means it can increase the cost of the fixture. When they're bin based on their adherence to the CCT, you can hear it referred to as SCDM or macadams. Some manufacturers will even report on their spec sheets how many steps out they've been, which gives you an idea how close in appearance or performance the light from those fixtures will be. This is again important when you have more than one fixture of the same kind in the same space. Since we like to control and shape the way the light comes out in a space, we take those created LED boards and we put lenses or prisms or reflectors over them to make the light come out the way we desire. That combination of your LED boards, your driver, and your lensing or your shaping mechanism, along with usually a housing to protect everything and hold it together, then becomes an LED light fixture. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. If you want any more detailed information on the terms and processes I've discussed, please feel free to contact me or email me, and I'll provide you with the resources to review.